Episode 5: The Last Survivor. Imagine being the only person left alive in a world that has ended. Not the world entire, of course. The earth continues. The sun rises. Rivers flow. But your world, the particular constellation of people and places that gave your life meaning, that world has been annihilated. Every person you knew is dead. Every building you recognized is ash. Every familiar sound is replaced by silence or the cries of carrion birds. You walk through ruins that yesterday were home. You pass bodies you recognize. There is the baker who made bread every morning, there is the woman who taught you to weave, there is the child who played in the street. All dead. All burned or slaughtered. All beyond any help you could provide. And you are alive. You alone. The last witness. The final survivor. This is the story of Vepsä. We know almost nothing about him beyond his survival. We don't know his real name. Vepsä might have been a nickname, a clan designation, or simply what people called him afterward. We don't know his age, his occupation, his family. The historical record is silent on everything except the essential fact: when Lapinlahti burned, when the Quarancualaiset came and killed everyone, when the world ended for that village on the northwestern shore of Lake Ladoga, one man survived. He survived by doing something extraordinary. He became, for days and nights, more water creature than human being. He submerged himself in the marshes and breathed through a hollow reed while soldiers and their dogs hunted for survivors above. He stayed hidden while his village burned, while his neighbors screamed, while the world he knew ceased to exist. And when he finally emerged from the water, he found himself alone among the dead, a ghost haunting ruins, the keeper of memories no one else remained to share. This is his story. Or rather, this is the story people told about him, passed down through generations until Theodor Schwint arrived in 1879 to write it down. It is a story about the extremes of human endurance, about what we are capable of when survival itself becomes an act of almost superhuman will. But it is also a story about a different kind of survival, the survival of memory itself, carried forward by the one person left alive to remember. The village called Lapinlahti. Before we witness its destruction, let us try to imagine Lapinlahti as it was. The name itself is revealing. Lapinlahti means Laps Bay in Finnish, suggesting once again the presence of earlier Sami inhabitants, or at least the memory of them. The village sat on the northwestern shore of Lake Ladoga, where a small bay provided shelter for fishing boats and a natural harbor for the transport of goods. It was not a large village. Few settlements in the region were. Perhaps a few dozen families, maybe 100 people total, living in wooden houses clustered near the shore and spreading up the hillsides where the land was suitable for farming. They would have grown rye and barley, kept cattle and pigs, fished the lake, hunted the forests. The rhythm of life would have followed the seasons: planting in spring, haying in summer, harvest in autumn, the long dark quiet of winter. They would have had a chapel or church. We know this because Schwint recorded that the area around Lapinlahti, called Rimalahti, had an ancient cemetery and the ruins of a chapel on what people called Kirkkomäki, Church Hill. The religious life of the community would have centered there, with the elaborate calendar of Orthodox feast days and fasts providing structure to the year. It was, in other words, an ordinary place. Not wealthy, not particularly strategic, not remarkable except to the people who lived there and loved it because it was home. Which made it a perfect target for the kind of warfare that devastated the Lake Ladoga region repeatedly during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. The Quarancualaiset, the dog-faced ones. To understand what happened to Lapinlahti, we must understand who the Quarancualaiset were and why they inspired such terror in the folk memory of the region. The name itself is striking: Quarancualaiset, literally, dog-muzzled ones, or dog-faced ones, in Finnish. It's clearly a descriptor given by Finnish and Karelian populations to a group they encountered as enemies, a name meant to dehumanize and to capture something about their appearance or behavior that seemed inhuman. Historical evidence suggests the Quarancualaiset were Kalmyk troops, Buddhist Mongolic people from the steppe regions east of the Volga River who served in Russian military forces during the 17th and 18th centuries. The Kalmyks were renowned as cavalry and were often employed by Russian armies in campaigns against Sweden and other enemies. Why dog-faced? Several possibilities exist. The Kalmyk appearance, Asian features, unfamiliar to Finnish and Karelian populations, might have been perceived as exotic and threatening. More likely, the name referred to their reputation as trackers and hunters. Kalmyk forces were known for using dogs in military operations, for their skill at tracking enemies through difficult terrain, and for their relentless pursuit of fleeing populations. The reputation may also have been enhanced by deliberate terror tactics. Armies throughout history have understood that a reputation for mercilessness can be as effective as actual force. If people believe you will kill everyone, they surrender rather than resist, or they flee rather than fight, making conquest easier. The Quarancualaiset may have cultivated their fearsome reputation deliberately. Whatever the precise historical reality, in the folk memory of Lake Ladoga, the Quarancualaiset represented a particular kind of threat, hunters who would never fail, who would track you anywhere, whose dogs could find you no matter how well you hid. They were implacable, inhuman in their efficiency, the nightmare made flesh. When people said, the Quarancualaiset came, it was shorthand for a specific kind of catastrophe, not just defeat in battle but systematic annihilation, the hunting down of every last survivor. The burning. The attack on Lapinlahti came suddenly, or at least seemed sudden to those who experienced it. Perhaps there had been warnings, rumors of armies moving in the region, news from other villages of raids and burnings. Perhaps scouts had spotted smoke on the horizon from earlier attacks. Or perhaps the attack came with no warning at all, raiders appearing at dawn or in the chaos of a storm. However it began, the result was catastrophic. The Swedish forces, or Russian forces employing Kalmyk troops, the folk memory conflates the various invasions, swept through Lapinlahti with systematic efficiency. Houses were set ablaze. People were killed as they fled or were caught inside burning buildings. Those who tried to hide were hunted down. The image that comes down to us through the story is of horses and dogs, of soldiers on horseback with war dogs trained to track human scent, moving through the village and the surrounding woods with terrible purpose. Not simply an army passing through and destroying opportunistically, but a deliberate operation to ensure no one survived, no one escaped. Why such thoroughness? In this kind of warfare, leaving survivors was dangerous. Survivors could regroup, could join resistance forces, could provide intelligence to enemy armies. Depopulating a region, creating a wasteland where no one lived to support your enemies, was a recognized military strategy, horrific as it sounds. The scorched earth policy had ancient precedents and would continue into modern times. Make the land unusable to your enemy by destroying everything: crops, livestock, buildings, and yes, people. What you cannot hold, you ensure no one else can use. Lapinlahti, an ordinary village of ordinary people who wanted nothing more than to live their lives in peace, was caught in this machinery of imperial warfare and ground to nothing. The decision to hide. Amid the chaos, Vepsä made a choice that would save his life. We don't know the precise sequence of events. Perhaps he was away from the main village when the attack began, in the fields, in the forest, fishing, and heard the commotion in time to avoid being caught immediately. Perhaps he was in the village and managed to slip away in the confusion. Perhaps he had a moment's warning and made a split-second decision. However it happened, Vepsä ran. Not along roads or obvious paths, those would be watched. Not to the fortress mountain, if Lapinlahti had one, that would be an obvious refuge and therefore a trap. He ran to the marshes. This was brilliant in its way. The marshes around Lake Ladoga were extensive, areas where the lake's water level fluctuated seasonally, creating zones of unstable ground, standing water, dense reed beds, and treacherous mud. Difficult to traverse on horseback. Difficult even on foot if you didn't know the safe paths. And crucially, the standing water and mud would confuse scent trails, making it harder for dogs to track. But marshes presented their own dangers. You could drown in them. You could become stuck in mud and die of exposure. You could lose your way and wander in circles until exhaustion claimed you. Vepsä knew these risks. He also knew he had no alternative. Behind him, his village was burning. The Quarancualaiset were hunting survivors with systematic efficiency. The marshes offered the only hope. But he did something more, something that showed remarkable presence of mind under unimaginable stress. He covered his tracks. According to the story, he took birch boughs, fresh-cut branches with leaves still attached, and swept the ground behind him as he retreated, obscuring his footprints, breaking the visible trail that trackers and dogs might follow. This is a technique that requires knowledge and skill. You cannot simply wave branches randomly and expect them to hide your passage. You must move backward, carefully brushing over each footprint, creating a natural-looking disturbance that won't immediately signal, someone tried to hide here. That Vepsä knew to do this, and had the composure to do it while fleeing for his life, suggests either remarkable training or remarkable instinct, possibly both. He might have been a hunter himself, someone who understood tracking and counter-tracking. Or he might have been drawing on folk knowledge, techniques passed down through generations about how to evade pursuers in the forest. Whatever the source of his knowledge, it worked. He reached the marshes with his trail obscured enough that immediate pursuit lost him. But now came the hardest part, staying hidden while the hunters searched. Breathing through a reed. The image that has come down to us, the detail that captured imagination and lodged itself in cultural memory, is this: Vepsä submerged himself in the marsh water and breathed through a hollow reed while the Quarancualaiset and their dogs searched above. Is this actually possible? Can a human being survive days and nights submerged in cold water, breathing through a narrow tube? The answer is, barely, and only under specific conditions. First, the reed itself. Not just any plant will work. You need something with a hollow stem, wide enough to allow airflow but not so wide it collapses under water pressure. Reeds of the genus Phragmites, common reed, grow abundantly in Lake Ladoga marshes and have stems that can work for this purpose. You would need to cut the reed carefully, ensuring both ends are open, creating a tube perhaps half a meter to a meter long enough to reach from your submerged position to the surface. Breathing through such a tube is difficult. The narrow diameter creates resistance, making each breath laborious. You cannot breathe normally, you must breathe slowly, deliberately, fighting the panic that comes from feeling air-starved. The tube can easily become blocked by water droplets, requiring you to blow forcefully to clear it without making noise that would give away your position. Then there is the cold. Lake Ladoga, even in summer, is cold water, typically 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, in the shallows where marshes form. Prolonged immersion in such temperatures causes hypothermia. Your core body temperature drops. Your muscles become sluggish. Your thinking becomes confused. Eventually, you lose consciousness and drown. Survival requires minimizing heat loss. You cannot thrash around trying to stay warm, movement creates ripples, makes noise, attracts attention. You must remain still, conserving energy, allowing your body to adjust to the cold as much as possible. Vepsä, if the story is true, would have needed to find a position where his body was supported, perhaps wedged against reeds or partially resting on submerged logs or mud, so he didn't have to actively tread water. He would have needed to stay shallow enough that the reed could reach the surface but deep enough that his body was concealed. Ideally, he would position himself under an overhang of reeds or vegetation that would hide the reed tube itself. And then he would have to simply endure. 4 hours. For days and nights, according to the legend. Modern survival experts suggest that the maximum time a human can survive fully immersed in water at these temperatures, even with perfect technique, is probably measured in hours, not days. Hypothermia would become unavoidable. But there are possibilities for longer survival. If Vepsä could get out of the water periodically, emerging at night when searchers had withdrawn, warming himself slightly, then submerging again before dawn, he could extend his survival time considerably. The story of days and nights in water might be somewhat compressed, days and nights in the marsh, with significant time submerged, but not continuously so. Or perhaps desperation and adrenaline enabled something beyond normal human limits. There are documented cases of people surviving conditions that should have killed them, driven by sheer will to live. Whatever the precise details, the core of the story is clear. Vepsä subjected himself to almost unbearable physical suffering to stay hidden while the hunters searched. The hunt above. While Vepsä lay hidden in the cold water, the Quarancules searched. They knew someone might have escaped. Villages always had survivors who fled, people in the fields who saw the attack coming, hunters in the forest, anyone lucky or alert enough to run before being caught. Part of the systematic approach to these raids was hunting down those survivors. The dogs would be the primary tool. War dogs trained to track human scent could follow trails through forests, across streams, into hiding places that humans might miss. The handlers would work systematically, casting the dogs in sweeps across likely escape routes. The marshes would be an obvious place to search. Anyone fleeing Lapinlahti might head there, seeking to lose pursuit in the difficult terrain. So the handlers brought their dogs to the marsh edges and sent them ranging through the reeds. Did the dogs scent Vepsä? Possibly. Water diminishes scent trails but doesn't eliminate them entirely. The dogs might have become agitated at the area where Vepsä had entered the marsh, indicating that someone had gone that way. But tracking into standing water is extremely difficult even for trained dogs. The scent trail breaks at the water's edge. The dogs can smell that someone went in, but not where they went after that. They might circle, frustrated, unable to pick up the trail again. The handlers might have waded into the marsh themselves, probing with spears or poles into the reeds, hoping to stumble across a hidden refugee. They might have stood and listened, hoping to hear labored breathing, a cough, any sound that would betray a hiding person. And Vepsä, submerged, breathing carefully through his reed, had to remain absolutely silent and still. A cough would kill him. A sneeze would kill him. Even a too loud breath might give him away. How long did they search? Hours, probably. Maybe they returned multiple times over several days, checking again, not quite convinced the marsh was empty but unable to find definitive proof anyone was there. Eventually, they gave up. They had other tasks, other villages to burn, other regions to devastate. They couldn't spend forever searching one marsh for one possible survivor. They withdrew. The sounds of horses and dogs faded. The marsh became quiet again except for the buzz of insects and the calls of waterbirds. And Vepsä remained hidden, not yet daring to emerge, not yet trusting that they were truly gone. Emergence into ash. When Vepsä finally emerged from the marshes, cold to the bone, exhausted beyond measure, probably barely able to walk, he returned to find Lapinlahti gone. Not damaged. Not partially burned. Gone. Every house was ash and charred timber. Every structure had been torched. The chapel on Kirkkomäki was destroyed. The bodies of everyone he had known lay scattered where they had fallen or piled where they had been killed together. The silence must have been overwhelming. A village is a place of sounds, people talking, children playing, animals making noise, the sounds of work and life. All that was replaced by silence broken only by wind and the cries of crows gathering to feed on the dead. Vepsä walked through this apocalypse alone. The sole witness. The only survivor. What did he do? The stories don't tell us in detail. Presumably, he searched for other survivors and found none. He tried to bury the dead, or at least cover them, though one man alone could not properly bury dozens of bodies. He salvaged what little might have survived the burning, perhaps tools, perhaps food from root cellars that escaped the flames. And then he had to make a decision. What does a last survivor do? He could stay in the ruins, trying to rebuild alone, an almost impossible task. He could flee the region entirely, seeking refuge in other villages or other lands. Or he could stay nearby, becoming a kind of living memorial to the village that was destroyed. What Vepsä actually chose, we don't know. The stories focus on his survival, not on his life afterward. But we can infer that he survived long enough, and spoke about his experience enough, that the story was preserved and passed down. He became known as Vepsä, the last survivor. His experience became a tale told to later generations as a warning, as a testament to human endurance, as a memorial to everyone who died. In this sense, he succeeded in the most important task a survivor can accomplish: he bore witness. He ensured that what happened to Lapinlahti would not be forgotten, that the people who died there would be remembered, that the catastrophe would be recorded in the only form of record available: human memory, spoken aloud, passed down through generations. The psychology of survival. What does it do to a person to survive when everyone else dies? Survivor's guilt is a well-documented phenomenon. People who live through catastrophes that kill others often experience profound psychological distress, feeling they should have died too, feeling somehow responsible for their survival or for not saving others, struggling to find meaning in being the one who lived. For Vepsä, this burden would have been extreme. He survived through extraordinary measures, hiding in a marsh, enduring conditions that should have killed him. He survived while everyone he knew perished. Every person whose body he found in the ruins was someone he had known, someone he had perhaps eaten with, worked beside, celebrated with. The temptation toward what we now call survivor's guilt would be overwhelming. Why me? Why did I live when they died? Should I have tried to warn people? Should I have fought instead of hiding? Could I have saved anyone? These questions, unanswerable and tormenting, might haunt a survivor for the rest of their life. But there is another psychological phenomenon at work in extreme survival situations: the transformation of identity. Vepsä ceased to be whoever he was before, ceased to be a farmer or fisherman or craftsman with a name and a family and a place in a community. He became, permanently, the last survivor. His identity merged with his survival. This can be both burden and purpose. The burden is carrying the weight of all those deaths, being the sole repository of memories that would otherwise be lost. The purpose is ensuring those memories persist, telling the story so the dead are not entirely forgotten. Vepsä's story, passed down through generations, suggests he chose purpose over despair. He told his story. He made sure people knew what happened to Lapinlahti. He bore witness. This is an act of profound courage, not the physical courage of hiding in the marsh, though that too was remarkable, but the moral courage of continuing to live and to speak when silence and surrender would have been easier. The burden of memory. There is a particular loneliness in being the only person who remembers something. If you and I both remember an event, we can discuss it, compare recollections, reinforce each other's memories. Memory becomes shared, social, stronger for being held in common. But if you alone remember, if everyone else who experienced the event is dead, then the memory becomes unstable. You begin to doubt yourself. Did it really happen as I remember? Are the details accurate? Am I filling in gaps with imagination? And there is no one to check with, no one to confirm or correct, no one to share the burden of remembering. Vepsä carried memories of Lapinlahti that no one else could confirm. He knew who had lived in each house. He remembered what the village sounded like in the morning, smelled like when bread was baking, looked like in summer when children played in the street. He remembered specific people, their faces, their voices, their stories. And all of that existed now only in his mind. When he died, those memories would die with him, unless he could transmit them to others. This is why the story became so important. By telling and retelling his experience, Vepsä ensured that at least the fact of Lapinlahti's destruction, at least the knowledge that people had lived and died there, would survive him. The specific details might be lost. We don't know the names of the people who died, don't know what their houses looked like, don't know the small particularities that made Lapinlahti unique. But we know it existed. We know it was destroyed. We know one man survived to tell about it. That knowledge is itself a victory over oblivion. Walking among the dead. The refrain of the song, "The Last Survivor," captures something essential about Vepsä's existence after his emergence from the marshes. I am the last survivor, walking among the dead. He walked among the dead literally, of course, through the ruins of Lapinlahti, past the bodies of people he knew. But he also walked among the dead figuratively for the rest of his life. Everyone from his former world was gone. The people he had known, the relationships that had defined his life, the social context that gave his existence meaning, all dead. He continued living, but in a sense he was a ghost, a remnant of a world that no longer existed. This is the fate of all survivors of cultural destruction. The Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, the Armenian survivors of genocide, the indigenous peoples whose communities were destroyed by colonization, they all become, in some sense, ghosts, walking among the dead, carrying forward memories of worlds that were annihilated. Vepsä's experience, while specific to Lake Ladoga in a specific war at a specific time, represents a universal human experience, the survival of catastrophe and the burden of remembering what was lost. The legacy of survival. By the time Theodor Schwint collected this story in 1879, probably 2 centuries had passed since the burning of Lapinlahti. Vepsä himself was long dead, as were his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But the story persisted. The tale of the man who hid in the marshes, breathing through a reed, who survived when everyone else died, who emerged to walk alone among the ruins, that story was still being told, still moving people, still serving as a testament to human endurance. Why did this particular story survive when so many others were forgotten? Partly, it's the dramatic power of the image. The man breathing through a reed while hunters search above is vivid, specific, memorable in a way that more general stories of war and suffering are not. Partly, it's the extremity of the experience. Vepsä represents the limit case of survival, the person who endured the unendurable. His story shows what humans are capable of when the alternative is death. But mostly, I think, the story survived because it offered something that people needed, proof that even the worst catastrophes can be survived, that even when everything is lost, life can continue, that one person's witness can preserve the memory of many who died. In a region that had experienced war after war, raid after raid, burning after burning, Vepsä's story was not just historical record but spiritual sustenance. It said, even this can be survived. Even total destruction can be witnessed and remembered. Even death itself is not the final word if one person lives to tell what happened. The last survivor speaks. Let Vepsä speak, in his own imagined voice, the words the song gives him. Now I tell the story to any who will hear / of the day my world ended, of the price we paid in fear / let the children remember, let the old ones not forget / the day the Quaranculesit came to collect their debt. This is the survivor's duty, to tell the story. To make sure the children remember and the old ones do not forget. To keep alive the memory of what was lost and what was paid. It is an exhausting duty. Telling trauma is reliving it. Each retelling brings back the cold water, the labored breathing through the reed, the sounds of horses and dogs above, the silence afterward, the walk through ruins. But it is a necessary duty. Because if Vepsä doesn't tell, who will? If he allows himself to forget, to bury the memories in silence, then Lapinlahti dies a second death, dies not just in fact but in memory. And so he tells. Again and again. To anyone who will hear. Passing the story forward so that it will outlive him, so that somewhere, in some form, the memory will persist. We are the inheritors of that telling. We, listening now, centuries later, in languages Vepsä never knew, in lands far from Lake Ladoga, are the children he asked to remember. And in hearing his story, in holding it in our minds even briefly, we fulfill his purpose. We ensure that Lapinlahti, destroyed centuries ago, forgotten by maps and history books, lives on still in the only way that matters, in human memory, in human empathy, in human determination not to let the dead be forgotten. Vepsä survived the marshes. But more importantly, his story survived time. And through it, so did everyone who died at Lapinlahti, preserved in the amber of folklore, witnessed and remembered. This is what it means to be the last survivor, to carry the dead forward into the future, to be their voice, to ensure their existence meant something. Vepsä, whoever you were, wherever your bones finally came to rest, your duty is complete. The story endures. The dead are remembered. You were the last survivor, but you were not the last witness. We witness now, through you.